This podcast is a proud member of the Unidentified Network.
Police in Las Vegas found themselves in the middle of a UFO mystery last month after
To us, big eyes. They have big eyes.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal? Or?
We're back! We are back here at the Mythical Legends podcast. Now, we have an amazing guest today and some amazing stuff lined up. But first, we are going to bring in our co-host. And our co-host, you guys will know, it's my partner in crime who does all the dirty work for me, such as casting, eDNA, kind of picks up all the dirty stuff so my hands can stay clean. Let's bring her on.
I just love my role in what we do. Yeah. All the things you don't want to do. Yay.
Well, welcome back. How are you?
Yeah, we're good. Well, we are,
Yeah?
both, aren't we? We
Yeah. So we did an investigation this morning, and that was quite interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The fact that my legs hurt, that probably told us that was kind of enough today. How long did we walk? About hour and a half.
Well, we were out for 3 hours, weren't we? So we didn't sit down at all. So it was a lot longer than that.
Yeah, and I will say today I'm wearing a proper uniform. Right, so don't forget, guys, we have our advert in today, and we have an amazing guest today, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Looking forward to finding out the stories.
Yeah, and say he's a fellow podcaster as well, which will be very interesting. Maybe we can steal some tips for him, and he can steal some tips from us. So everyone out there, don't forget, just because this isn't live doesn't mean that you can't comment. You guys may know this podcaster, and kind of we can share some stuff. If you wanted to comment, please go ahead and comment. And if you wanted to ask him any questions, you can always send him a message or send me a message and I can get it to him. But until then, guys, let's bring on Jeremiah. Hey,
Hi,
bud.
Daniel.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Nice to meet you, Daniel and Jill.
Yeah, you too.
Amazing. Right, mate. I'm going to jump straight in and no faffing about. Let's jump straight into the story and go with, what was your inspiration for getting into the Bigfoot world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's kind of an interesting trail. So I grew up in the New England area of the U.S., in Western Massachusetts, and my dad used to watch a lot of really interesting TV. One of them being In Search Of, which you may have heard of from other guests, I'm guessing, and unsolved mysteries and things like that.
It's
Yeah.
It's a definite dad thing, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. So that kind of showed me the Patterson-Gimlin film at an early age. Then I kind of, you could say, take some time off during high school, got interested in other things. But then in my early 20s, I got more interested in the weird again. Sometimes that happens. And so I was at a place I was working, and I met some other friends that were into cryptids. I lived in Iowa at the time. We found out there were some cryptids out here. And one of my friends was involved with filming some interviews for a documentary that Small Town Monsters was putting out, the Terror in the Skies documentary about thunderbirds. And so he invited me to come along with him to see some famous authors interviewed in Des Moines. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And then right before we got there, he was like, I actually need you to come up with some questions and be off camera so I can get the right answers. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'd never done anything like that before. But halfway through, I was like, I love this interview thing. I love it. And long story short, I was like, hey, I could start my own podcast. I mean, you don't have to ask anyone to do it. You could just do it, right? So about almost 5 years ago, in February of 2019, I started the Bigfoot Society podcast, and I've just been talking to people about their interactions with cryptozoology, different cryptids, but especially in the last year, the podcast has turned into a way for me to talk to people that have experienced Bigfoot, had their encounters, and I found that a lot of these people really need an outlet where they feel safe, they're not going to be made fun of, and I feel like I'm able to provide that platform for a lot of these people who haven't talked about their encounters for 20 years. And some of them say, oh, I can, sleep at night now. Thank you for letting me talk. So it's kind of what I do.
Well, it's I think that's kind of the joy of kind of having all these podcasts around where people can go on and talk to kind of people that will just sit there and kind of listen, including myself, including you, mate, and including everyone that's in the podcast world. And it's really, really interesting just kind of listening to people's stories. And mate, I totally get what you mean. It's kind of say Jill's kind of hosted quite a few with me, and we've kind of learned a lot of that. But then given these guys something to kind of just talk and to just share their kind of encounters, and in one way it releases something off their back, but for everyone kind of cryptozoologists, scientists, researchers, it gives them a bit more of an idea on kind of what kind of some of the members of the public are kind of seeing in and kind of what they're encountering with these kind of Bigfoot kind of legends and that.
Well, I think it broadens the knowledge, doesn't it? Every podcast is interviewing different people. By the time we all share that, we've got a wealth more information than we would ever have had before. It's a fairly simple way, but it's a lovely way, isn't it? It's safe and good interactive way of sharing this.
Yeah. So I'll kind of move on to your podcast then, mate, and I'm gonna go to kind of what are some of the most interesting stories you've heard from your podcast?
Yeah. So Daniel, there's been a lot of really interesting ones over the years. I can definitely share a few of them, and you can decide if you want to keep them in. I'll try not to get too wild, but one of my favorites is a gentleman that did not agree to come on the podcast, but his story was quite interesting. And he was a gentleman who lived in the far northern area of Maine, way out in the woods. He had a large acreage out there, and this is right underneath the Canadian border, so you're far away from everyone. He had a trailer out there on a piece of land. And so it was pretty backwoods. They would have to do things like wash their dishes down in the stream by the trailer. And so he was down there washing the dishes one day, and he heard something, looked up, he saw what he said, a hairy man run across him, run across in front of him. So he said that was weird. Fast forward to back in the trailer, and a few nights later, the side of the trailer is actually hit so hard by something that it was knocked off the blocks, which that's extremely hard, right?
Wow.
And to even complicate things even more, the next morning when they opened the door to go outside, there was a bear's head just sitting there in front of the door by itself, no attached bear body, which I would think would be horrifying, right? And so that's how he took it too. And he said, we got out of there as quick as we could the next few days. And I was like, did you ever go back? Not a chance. Which it's interesting because people take that story different ways. Myself, I thought, he's being threatened. He needs to get out. Some people I've told that to have been like, would you consider that a gifting situation? And I'm like, I don't personally know. I wouldn't stick around, but I guess
same, yeah.
So I begged that guy to come on the podcast. He would not do it. He's like, I'll tell you, but I don't want to get involved with that anymore. Oh man, there's been some really, really fun ones that I have talked to. Let's see. There's another gentleman I talked to. He was a firefighter involved in the Mount St. Helens area of Washington State, particularly in an area called Mosquito Meadows, which I found later on is an extremely, you could say, squatchy area from reports over the years. But this gentleman approached me, and he even sent me some pictures of him back in the day in the 80s, old pictures of him around this Mount St. Helens area in his firefighting getup. And he said that he would sit in front of his tent every morning, just drinking his coffee, and he would listen to what he could only describe as the sound of gibbon hoots across the valley in front of him. And as we may both know, there's no gibbons in the Pacific Northwest of America. But, I mean, to think that there's animals out there, well, creatures, we could say, that's a little bit of my bias coming out. Just the little anecdotal story that he was able to hear what he could only say were gibbon hoots. It was fascinating. That again was actually a gentleman who wouldn't come on the podcast. Usually, if they don't want to come on the podcast, that's a good sign because it means that there could be some pretty wild stuff. I did have a gentleman come on the podcast. His name is Jim Whitehead from Western Oklahoma. And Daniel, I don't know if you know about Oklahoma, but Southeast Oklahoma usually gets all the people excited, right? Because you've got some wild Bigfoot encounters, and you got Area X, etc. However, Jim Whitehead is a researcher from the western part of the state, and he was at his house one day, and it was getting to be more nighttime, and he had a well house a little bit outside of his house, and there was a mechanical part inside the house that was making noise. So that's important to know in a few minutes. So it was making a clicking noise, right? So rewind a little bit earlier in the day, Jim was researching his property around his house. He was a half a mile away from the house. All of a sudden, a foot-long, 3 to 4 inch stick gets thrown at him out of the woods, and Jim sees the silhouette of something dark and large out of the corner of his eyes. He says, it's time for me to get back to the house. Even though I'm out here looking for this, I don't really want to stick around if something's throwing something at me. So he gets back to the house. His buddy who was there to pick up stuff says, hey, Jim, you're pretty spooked. Do you want me to hang out? Jim says, no, I'll be okay. I'm inside the house now. Long story short, something starts happening outside. The dogs were freaking out at first. Then they get extremely quiet and disappear. So Jim is looking outside through the window. All of a sudden, a rock hits his security light, takes it out. Jim is starting to get freaked out. So he turns out all the lights in his house. He's looking through his scope going from window to window, and he's looking out at the well house from his house. He sees through his scope what he can only describe as the silhouette of a large ape reaching up to the door of the well house and tearing it off the hinges so it could see what the noise was. Needless to say, Jim did not get much sleep that night. And there's a few other things that happen, but that's my favorite part of the story. The Jim Whitehead episode is a really fun one to listen to. So.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy. All three of them. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's and there's all of them kind of interest me, but one that kind of really stands out is the Mount St. Helens one, because obviously I know the history behind that, and to still have something around there, you go, is that a potential home that they live by? Is it kind of and also you then go to kind of, are they kind of the noise? Are they communicating? Are they kind of
right?
It's something that you do question, and because all these sounds has got to be some sort of communication language. Now, obviously, I refer to Ron Moorhead, who captured these Sierra sounds. I go to he obviously captured some language in that, and I go, do they have their own kind of language? Like we have English, we have kind of all the different languages for humans. Do they have their own? It's something that's...
It must be a communication of some sorts, because otherwise there is no point to them making sounds, is there? I think it must be a call that they understand within themselves, whether it's just a distress call, an alarm call, a primitive form of communication, or whether they do have a really intricate one.
Yeah, I mean that's talking about, whoops and hoots. So you could also talk about, tree knocks, and that's another form of communication where, a lot of researchers will even have their recorders going as they leave their cars as they get into a research area. Specifically, Chris Spencer from the Olympic Project. And when they go back and they listen to their recorded audio, sometimes the tree knocks will start immediately after they exit their car for the first time. And they're not hearing it because they're focusing on getting their stuff out of the car. But it's like these creatures are often, or maybe even signaling that, hey, there's humans here. And something else that the Olympic Project has been able to catch on is sometimes it will happen when someone is leaving the area, they'll catch a knock on recorded audio. And that might be something to the effect of, okay, they're starting to move out. That's on one of Eli Watson's newest episodes on YouTube with the Olympic Project. That's coming out soon. Yeah, it's just communication. It's such a fascinating thing to think about, and you have these people that are, thinking that, or they're hearing weird things in the woods. They're hearing mimic sounds. They're hearing owl sounds that are much louder than any owl should sound like. They're hearing metallic doors opening in the woods, far, far away from where any cars should be. There's just some really, really interesting communication possibilities that happen with the Bigfoot.
Wow.
I go with kind of the going back to kind of the first ever story that you said was kind of the cabin being attacked almost. That and I go, are they curious? Are they is that the way of kind of them finding out what's inside, or possibly is it where they live? Do they possibly feel threatened?
Well, yeah, that's a really
maybe
good
it's
point.
too close to maybe
Well,
they're a bit,
young?
or maybe got young. You know, I think most animals are dangerous when they've got young, aren't they? They don't want anyone near. Maybe it's something like that.
Something I've picked up, Daniel, from talking to a lot of people that have had encounters or particularly aggressive things happen on their property is usually what will happen is when I start to probe a little bit and ask questions, almost 100%, there's been some clearing of brush or taking down trees on the property, which is fine. You know, if you're a property owner, definitely you can do that. But be aware, maybe if you live in certain areas, you might be making the Bigfoot mad. And that's when they start, throwing things at your house or worse. And I would even imagine, and I didn't get to interview this gentleman, but I would imagine that if he was clearing brush or cutting down trees on that property, man, that could definitely had something to do with it. But that's a thing where it's a little bit of me imagining, but lines up with other stories that encounters that I've heard so far.
And I would say we've kind of interviewed some interesting people, and certainly with kind of my other co-hosts, every time we come off a podcast, I go, wow, and everyone has a very, very different story. Everyone. I've never had someone and never the same story. We've never had the same story, and it's always kind of been very, very different. And I think with kind of everyone, you could talk about something different. Let's say we had you on 4 times. We could talk about something different every time.
Absolutely.
There's just so much.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's really fascinating. You pick up the similarities. They're different stories, but there's lots of similarities in their behavior or how people see them or what happens. That's the fascinating thing. I think that's where you start to build the picture up of how they are, what they live like, what their personalities could be. I find that the most interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. The more that you do this, it's really weird because I've been talking to people for a few years now, and I've learned a lot of interesting information about the creature, and then I go back and I listen to my original interviews, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I was so inexperienced in the field that I had no idea that person just said that, and I didn't realize the ramifications. But it's the more that you learn, then you almost start putting all the pins on the board and connecting things, and there's really a little bit of an investigative journalist thing going on too. It almost feels like if you really get into talking to all these people and you figure out, oh, there's certain areas where you have a better chance of seeing a creature, or if a person brings up this, then they're probably going to bring up something related to this next. And it's wild. I talk to people usually 2 or 3 nights a week, so it's awesome.
Wow. So we've got loads kind of in the bag, trying to release them slowly. But I think before Christmas, I did probably 2 or 3 weeks with just a podcast every night, and I was learning something new every night. It got to a point where I'm like, I can't stop. You can't kind of stop. So my last question before we have a few seconds of break. Do you go out and do your own research?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. When do you think this might release?
This will release probably, it would be in about 2 months from now.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about it. So I do go out. So for the last 2 years, I've gone out to an area in Iowa with a friend. You may have heard of him. He's a researcher named Tate Hieronymus. And we've gone out. First first time 2 years ago, it was him and myself, and he had been talking to me, and he'd been like, okay, you're the guy talking to all the people that have seen Bigfoot. We got to get you out in the field so you get what these people are talking about, right? And so I kept saying, no. And then he was like, dude, it's super easy. Just do it. It's like two nights. And I was like, all right, I have no excuse. Let's do it. So we go out to this area in Iowa, extremely wooded area, super hot that weekend. With heat index, it was up to 110, extremely dangerously hot. So things in the woods were having issues moving around. No creatures want to move around, right? So the first night, we didn't really have anything happen. We were just trying to not burn up, right? The next day, it drops about 20 to 30 degrees. Stuff starts moving around. We're sitting around the campfire, and all of a sudden, we hear a large tree get pushed over in front of us in the woods, about 30 feet in the woods, to the point where in my newishness, I said, is someone lighting off fireworks? It was that loud. And he's like, dude, we're out in the middle of the woods, way far away from it. No one has fireworks out here. We were at a primitive campsite way, way out. And I was like, oh boy. Okay. And then he's like, I'm going to start doing some knocks. He does a few knocks on a tree near the campsite. We hear some knocks back, and we're like, we don't even have to go out tonight. Like, it is a thing where it's coming to the camp area. And I was a little bit like, okay. So I had an audio recorder with me, and I actually left the audio recorder out on a area about 30 feet away. That last night, it was about 3 a.m. I captured a few wood knocks, and it was about it was like I believe it was a three wood knock. But the weird thing was, shortly after that, and I was in a tent. Tate was in his Jeep, or in his truck that year, and I was in my tent by myself. I captured what myself and other people, I mean, it's a blatant zipper noise, and I didn't leave the tent to go use the facilities or anything. So that really messed with me for a few months after, because I was like, I didn't open the tent, but yet there's a zipper noise. So was something trying to get in the tent? That's just weird. And then I talked to a few people for the podcast a month later, and they told me stories without knowing my story about how people had been in a tent, they'd had a Bigfoot unzip the tent, things of that. And that freaked me out. So Tate has the audio for that in his documentary, Sasquatch: A Search for Sabi, on his YouTube channel. And you can hear the audio and decide for yourself. But we either think that it was something opening up the tent, or another researcher I know in Iowa, Ontario Richardson, she has actually heard the zipper noise when she's been far out in the woods, not around any things that have zippers, and the things that do have zippers on her person, like, I'm not unzipping it, right? That type of deal. So what we were talking about last year at the second time is perhaps this is a mimic sound where they have heard this zipper sound at the campsite, and they can mimic it themselves. It's just a really weird thing to experience your first time out, because Tate kept saying, like, okay, you need to realize this stuff doesn't happen all the time. Like, don't take this for granted. You're here, you're getting weird stuff, and this is like usually doesn't happen first time out. Yeah, so it's some really weird stuff. But yeah, I've been out. I say two solid times at a certain place in Iowa, and yeah, my goal is to eventually get out to the Pacific Northwest. I'm working very hard for that to happen within the next year or so. So really get out there
That'll be amazing.
and see what happens.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So to everyone out there, we're gonna have a very, very short break, and then we'll be back with a slightly different topic.
For half an hour on Saturday afternoons and for a quarter of an hour on Wednesday evenings, the world's only show about hard science, weird shit and surreality. And it's co-presented by an anthropomorphic chicken. Be there or be square.
I love you guys so much. I love the UK so much.
We just say this wasn't our doing.
This wasn't ours. Trust me, mate. I'm down to. It's a team network.
We don't understand it at all.
Okay.
That's great. Those guys are good too. I've talked to Richard Freeman. He's a good guy.
Well, to be absolutely honest with you, mate, Richard has just messaged me, so that's really, really odd.
Weird.
Yeah. We'll talk about that after the show. Yeah. Oh, he knows it as well. So let's kind of move on and go to kind of when you are out in the field, do you have any tips for kind of when researching?
Yeah, definitely. So some things that I learned from going out and for a few days each time is at the end of the day, what you're doing out there is not 100% Bigfoot all the time. It is, you need to be aware that you're going out and you're pretty much having a fun camping weekend, but the focus is also Bigfoot, right? Another thing I learned is have some gear with you. You can get a really, nice, inexpensive audio recorder from Amazon for $80 to $100 American. But remember that those batteries are not going to last the whole weekend. So it helps to maybe even put a reminder on your phone that, hey, before I go to bed tonight, I should put new batteries in the recorder or you're going to miss some cool stuff. Let's see. Go out with someone that you know and someone that you trust. If you are going to go out by yourself, please tell people where you're going, just for safety, right? Just be prepared. There's even an app you can use now called Onyx, which is really cool. A lot of hunters will use it, but a lot of Bigfooters will use it. And it's got all the GPS mapping built into it, but you can share your specific location with someone back home so they know where you're going to be in case, worst case something happens, you can be safe, right? Those are the top things that another thing is a lot of people don't realize that it's a lot of sitting around potentially when you're going out and doing these expeditions. Like it could be hours because most people, they're waiting until the dusk, right? Until it gets a little darker. That's when the creatures start to move around mostly. So maybe have some games with you. Maybe have, some types of different music you can listen to. Another thing Tate taught me is, just be normal humans when you're in the camp because they're going to start to be curious, and that's what's going to bring them in. So he has music. Sometimes he'll have a musical instrument. Sometimes, watch a movie, all sorts of stuff. There's even one time when he played video games. And it might sound like that's kind of weird, but remember, you just want to be a normal human being and make him a little bit curious. So if that's what it takes, do that.
That is some brilliant advice. Brilliant advice. I will completely agree with that. I think that is probably one of the best pieces of advice we've had on the podcast. I think that, mate, that is awesome. I'm going to move on to something that some people can be a bit skeptical about. Now, I have a very strong opinion, and I know Jill has a very strong opinion, and I think you, by what you said earlier, you may agree with us. Do you think Bigfoot is completely paranormal, or do you think Bigfoot is completely flesh and blood, or both?
Or a mixture.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that's a good question. So I will put a disclaimer in which my podcast is a fun one because even though, and I'll share how I feel in a minute, but even though I feel a certain way, I let all sorts of people come on. And it doesn't matter if you're flesh and blood versus woo, because that seems to be the whole dividing line, at least in the U.S. cryptozoology scene for Bigfoot. Myself personally, I feel that we are looking at some sort of undiscovered great ape. So if you're familiar with like the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, very close to what they are going after. Also the Olympic Project as well. But I honestly believe we are looking at a flesh and blood creature. Now, there are some things that I hear from people that I highly respect, very interesting things that I can't explain. For example, I'll share one interesting anecdote that I heard that actually happened in Iowa, northeast Iowa, at Backbone State Park. A Bigfoot researcher named Rick Rellis shared with me how they were in the park one night, and all of a sudden they saw a blue orb floating in front of them down the trail. They're very confused by this. And then they heard something behind them, and they looked behind them, and they saw a Bigfoot with its hands stretched out, controlling the orb, making it go certain ways. I have no idea, no way of how to explain that, right? Because that gentleman, I really respect him. I don't know, being a flesh and blood guy, the only thing I can kind of explain is, there are some animals in this world that are very weird and have very, very weird things that they can do that, years ago we might not have even thought. I mean, one that comes to mind, the echidna, I believe, has a way of sensing electricity through an area of the front of his face. So what's to say that, maybe there's an animal that can do extremely weird things that would be considered woo? I think science will have to answer for that years down the road, hopefully in our lifetime. But personally, I am a flesh and blood guy. But
that's exactly what we are.
And I think we try to be the same, don't we? On all of your podcasts, we welcome anybody, whatever their views, and we listen to them. And you can't help but question them, because these are quite credible people. Who's to say they're wrong? I mean, personally, and Daniel, we're more on the side of science and practical things, but lot of other people have come up with very similar things: the orbs, the lights, the cloaking, the quick travel. Who's to say that there isn't something that none of us are aware of? So we're pretty much do the same. We like to let everybody completely have their own views. We don't don't discriminate against anyone.
There is something that I can kind of wrap my head around when and we could go as deep as we want, and I want to kind of cover it as quickly as we can if it's possible, kind of the cloaking side of stuff. So I don't think personally, unless someone shows me that Bigfoot puts the invisibility cloak from Harry Potter over him, I ain't gonna believe it. So I've kind of worked around that, and I've gone, right, so what's in this world that could do it? Chameleons can kind of turn themselves into, now people has witnessed where Bigfoot is wearing like a deer kind of skin or parts of their environment, which does mean it's like we went to the forest today and we said, look at the amount of ferns everywhere. Something could be looking right at us right now, and we just can't see it, which does mean if they had like leaves all over them and they had deer skin on them and they were in the ferns, they could be sort of invisible. Now that's possibly where some people possibly getting that kind of cloaking thing from. That's the only logical explanation I can think of. What do you think, mate?
So what I usually hear or seen in different forms of media is they will say that it was similar to the 80s movie Predator, where it's like a shimmering, there's something there, but we can't see it. It's like a shimmering something in the air. That I have a hard time coming up with any logical explanation of what that could be, unless, and totally other rabbit hole, but unless it's a thing where it's actually something that you're incorporating some form of military technology, and that alone is a whole wild and crazy thing. But I can't think of anything natural that could cause that, unless there's something in nature that we still haven't discovered, which is possible, that could cause some sort of cloaking, shimmering thing. It's just, that one is hard for me to wrap
it's
my
hard
mind
to
around.
get your head around, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's not to say that it's 100% false, is it? I think you have to have a reasonably open mind, don't you?
Yep.
On any of this.
And there's no way that we can say right now that none of that we could be wrong. We could be the ones that
I'll be proved wrong.
Are completely wrong. But it's kind of, some people say we have proper facts about Bigfoot. I can go, I'm not sure we have actual physical, factual in science facts about Bigfoot yet.
Yeah.
Now, unless we have a body stood in front of us and we can take hairs out of it and take the DNA, we ain't gonna have proper facts about it until we find whatever this is.
Absolutely.
Now, I think that's the mystery behind it. Do you reckon?
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing, because in order for science to, and us and the world to be on the same side, I feel that it is going to take some sort of specimen where, just like you were saying, they can, take hairs from it. They can research all the different parts of it. And if, as Jill was saying, if we learn something from researching that specimen and it totally is not what I was believing, then hey, I will totally switch what I believe,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is what it's going to take for everyone to get on the same side of, Bigfoot's real and it's out there, and we have to deal with that now.
Yeah.
And I think unless we find a bone, if we find a bone of an unknown something, then we're on to something. But until that happens, we're kind of still in this kind of mystery, kind of, aren't we?
You're into bones, aren't you? We found quite a few bones over our last few trips out, and Daniel's desperate for one of them to be a Bigfoot one, and they always turn out to be deer or rabbit or something.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that there's some, I know Darby Orcutt from, I believe it's North Carolina State, is doing the study where he's taking in all sorts of, anyone can send in evidence and they'll look at the DNA that might be associated with it. And I'm just hoping that program will be able to pick up some solid evidence.
Well, I can say, I don't know if you've heard of kind of our eDNA kind of findings. Have you heard of that?
A little bit, yeah.
Very, very brief. Both myself and Jill, and it was Jill the one who found the footprint. It was an 18-inch footprint. We took eDNA, and there was some other indentations, probably 20 minutes from the other one that we took eDNA from as well. And we took it into the lab, and they went, okay, 6 weeks, and they came back with Old World Monkey and Great Ape DNA.
Wow, that's wild. And the great thing is that it's just you guys, and you're dealing directly with the labs, right? Yeah,
Well,
and
it was a one-off kind of offer, wasn't it? I think because Dan relentlessly phoned dozens of labs all over the place, hadn't you? And it cost a lot of money, and we don't have any. We don't have money of that to spend. And one of them was so intrigued that he was only 14 and doing this that they offered to do it for free.
Oh wow!
But it was a one-off.
Right.
It was a one-off offer. So we're hoping that we can persuade them to do maybe a double one, do another one.
There you go. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's a massive mystery, and in one way, I want to find it and I want to research it. In one way, I want that mystery to stay there. It's kind of because would it get rid of that big mystery? Would it get rid of the podcast? Would it get rid of all that? That's my kind of...
So, Daniel, I've actually thought of that. I've had the same thought. And let's say, if next week there's a specimen discovered, and then kind of like the UFO disclosure thing, now it's Bigfoot disclosure. That's when people like us are going to become extremely important, because there's going to be a lot of Bigfoot in the news. And, there's going to need to be people that can stand up, maybe even for conservation efforts, And podcasters and authors, and I guess people on TV, but are going to be the ones in the forefront. But podcasters especially, because we're putting so much content, sometimes multiple times a week out there.
Yeah.
So I've kind of thought of that as well, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a massive mystery. Well, that time has flown by, absolutely flown by. So my last question for you, buddy, is for our viewers for the Mythical Legends podcast and for the Unidentified Network. Could you tell them where they can find your podcast?
Absolutely. So you can look for the Bigfoot Society podcast on any major podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, all that good stuff. YouTube, I have all the episodes released on YouTube. And BigfootSocietyPodcast.com has the rest of the links. If you do have a Bigfoot encounter that you would like to share, just with me directly, or potentially even on the podcast, you can contact me directly at BigfootSociety@gmail.com, and I would love to be able to have you tell your story. So
amazing, mate. And I want to thank you, bud, for being with us today. It's been a pleasure, and I know that we have both enjoyed it.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
it's
Really
been
lovely.
It's been amazing, mate.
Thank you so much.
In talk.
To everyone out there, where there you go, there is our amazing podcast. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to Jeremiah's podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, and keep searching and stay mythical. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.